Okay, good evening, everybody. The time is 7:01 p.m. It's Monday, June 9th. We are in the New Rochelle City Council chambers. It's 7:01 p.m., so Chair, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this second meeting. Second of three public hearings, and this hearing is to consider testimonies from the public view regarding rent adjustments for leases commencing or being renewed between October 1st, 2025 and September 30th, 2026. I will now take roll call. Please respond to the present. Evelyn, Alicea, Santiago, public member.
Present.
Natalie S, public member.
Present.
Kenneth J, owner representative.
Here.
Sylvia Hamer, tenant representative.
Present.
Gregory, Robeson, Smith, public member.
Here.
Tamara Stewart, tenant representative.
Present.
Withers.
Present.
And I'm Elsa Rubin, owner representative. I'm sorry, public representative. It's not a party state. Let the record show that we have quorum. As you can see, we have two new public members with us. They replace Belén Agua, who was a public member for 9 years, and she resigned because she moved out of the state. And another member replaced Eddie Barnes. She retired after serving as a public member for 13 years. And we just learned that she passed away today. So our sincere condolences to her family. I would now like to introduce the new public members that I have here to Natalie. Please, can you say something? Introduce yourself to the people here.
My name is Natalie Felsenfeld. I am the principal attorney at law offices at Felsenfeld PLLC in Austin. I practice estate planning, estate administration, and real estate. And my interest in this board was really to expand my knowledge of real estate and really just kind of learn more and to help the public.
Thank you. Mr. Robeson speak? Yes.
Hi, I'm Greg Smith, public member. I've done a tremendous amount of development in New York City and currently doing senior housing. I sit on the White Plains Housing Authority Board, and I am the senior pastor of the Mount Hope Zion Church in White Plains.
Thank you. Our third and last public hearing will take place on Thursday, June 12th at 7 p.m. at the Mount Vernon City Hall. And I'd like to recognize our council, Peter Stecker, and also April Gray Hortas. And Peter, do you have any announcements to make?
No announcements, Chair. I was just going to remind everyone about the meeting. We already did that.
Thank you. So if there are no more announcements or anything, I would like to start by just giving the regular rules that I give every year, the rules and procedures for testifying in front of this board. If you wish to address the board and you have not signed in the list, you may do it now if you want to speak. It's right here. Individuals have 3 minutes to speak, and persons representing organizations have 5 minutes. And please, Mr. Stecker will be the timekeeper.
Sure.
If you have materials to support your presentation, please give them to Mr. Stecker, and he will give it to each one of us. comments should be addressed to the entire board, not to individual persons, and do not interact with the public members. When I say the public members, not the public members from here, but you sitting there. And last but not least, please let's silence our phones, including mine, so that we don't have any interruptions. And with that said, I'm going to call the first person in the list. Here is Tim Connors. Mr. Connors, are you representing an organization or?
Yeah, I'm with Slattery Energy Group.
Thank you.
We're an energy consulting company.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. So as we are an energy consulting company, our expertise is helping customers with reviewing their energy bills. It's one of the things that we do. And what we've been finding over the past 6 months is a large increase in the cost of electricity and natural gas to our clients that are in the Westchester County and New York City area behind Con Edison. So the two main factors for that is weather. We've had a pretty cold winter, not an extremely cold winter, but a cold winter versus the last 2 years. It's been pretty mild. But the other piece of the equation is not just the weather, but increases in the cost of natural gas and electricity is predominantly raising rates roughly around 30%. So one of the things we want to talk about is Con Edison has recently filed for rate increases. And the rate increases are in the neighborhood of 11% in total revenues and for electricity and 13% for gas. So those rate increases have already been acknowledged by the Public Service Commission. They have not approved it yet. It's still an open case. The governor has provided input as far as going against it. But those rate increases have been due for a few reasons. They're indicating it's due to local property taxes, which affect everybody. New infrastructure investment of roughly 2.6% of the rate increase, and then operating expenses. And that's only a small portion of it. Largely, the investments are coming because of demand growth. There's clean energy options and substation upgrades. Those are the reasons that Con Edison is requesting those increases. With new demand growth, meaning for AI technologies, for growth, for the switch over from fossil fuels to electricity, cleaner burning electricity, that's part of the reason why they're looking for increases. All these changes are reflective of costs that are being absorbed by residents, by landlords, by everybody. So we're just adding to the fact that there's increases in insurance rates, increases in taxes. As you can see, Con Edison's looking for a rate increase because their taxes have gone up. So what we're saying is, when's enough enough? So what our position is on behalf of our client base and the constituents of the BRI of Westchester, is that enough is enough, and there shouldn't be any more rate increases. And that's on the proposed. They've recently, over the last 3 years, have gotten on electricity rates from 2025, this past year, there was a 1.5% to 3.8% increase depending on the rate class. In 2024, there was a 3.4% to 4.3% rate increase. And in 2023, it was an 8.7% to 9% rate increase. When you add those numbers up, you're looking at anywhere between 15 and 20%. A little surprising, right? Natural gas, in 2025, there was a 6.6% rate increase, and these are only on the delivery side of the equation, which is a big piece. The 2024 increase was 6.7%, and 2023 was 8.4%. Again, over 20%. So, Westchester County Executive Ken Jenkins voiced strong opposition, stating that the residents and business cannot afford further rate increases. There's a coalition of 30 Westchester municipalities formed to challenge the hikes, arguing that Con Edison must provide greater transparency and justification before passing costs on to ratepayers. I believe the governor is already taking steps to look into more transparency, especially in the nature of all utilities, not just Con Edison, all utility executives' pay structures. Because where are all these, the numbers don't add up. But I will leave this for you. I'll give you a copy of it. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you have one copy for each board member?
I don't. I didn't know how many people were gonna be here, I'm sorry. Yeah, it must be.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you.
So the increased rates that you mentioned, is that equally divided or equally, does it affect owners and
Oh, it affects everyone.
tenants pretty much about the same?
Yes.
All right, I didn't know if there was like some
So when I
drastic
mentioned,
difference between the one and the other.
on the electricity side, when I mentioned it was a range from 1% to 3%, that would be based on what rate class you're in. All right, so in some cases, for low income, it was on the lower side, but for everybody else, it was on the higher side.
Okay.
So they do acknowledge that,
Okay.
Any other questions?
but everybody is seeing an increase, there's no,
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes, I have a question. In your rationale, in your pushback rationale to Con Edison in regards to these increases, are you using, I heard you mention that what Con Edison is saying, or their rationale for, or one of their rationales for an increase is they need to invest in their infrastructure because of now going to clean energy. Whose responsibility is that? I mean, is that the person who's using the energy, or is that Con Edison as the energy providers?
so there's a percentage, a smaller percentage is for that piece as well. So there's different components of the overall increase. That's a smaller piece, it's 2%, 2.5%, that's what's indicated.
So they're allocating
So
2%.
yeah, so they are allocating it. There is a need for it. I used to work for the utility, not Con Edison, but I worked for a utility on Long Island, and I'm pretty familiar with how it works. So when there's a large amount of net metering, like for solar, for wind energy, and it goes back and feeds back into the substation, there are upgrades that are required. There are feeders that need to be replaced. So that does have to happen. What I'm saying though is not all of this has to happen. Should there be a rate increase? Maybe. Should it be 20, over the last 4 years, should it be over 20%? That's the question, that's the issue.
Thank you.
Mr. Finger has a.
Yeah, I have a question. When, in regard to gas and or electricity, is there a greater rate when more is used? In other words, if there is a larger amount of use of electricity or gas, when you get to a certain point, does the rate per whatever it is increase?
It actually decreases for additional use. So for example, if you looked at a rate, an electric rate, an EL9 rate, which is for large customers, versus an EL2 rate, if you looked at the average rate, there is the EL2, which is the smaller of the two, would be a lesser rate. So for large customers, they use a lot of energy, they do pay a lesser amount, because overall, it's still a big number. Sure.
It would seem to me that with the improvement in infrastructure, they should be operated more efficiently and produce in greater abundance. So their return on their investment is far greater by making these improvements, but they're passing the cost of it on to the consumer.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Anybody else? No? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next person is Anthony Corvino.
We're actually together,
Yes.
so you spoke on my behalf on that side of it. If there's more details on the questions, so what do you have, I'm more than welcome to expand on it with specifics.
I don't think there are any more questions. No?
So actually, and just to expand on what Tim mentioned, is on the natural gas side. We turned in the report, but I have a particular example of an account where Con Ed delivery rates 4 years ago were anywhere from 85 cents to $1.10, where the past 2 months now have been $1.63 and $1.53. So you can see those increases, and just to get whose point it was, but that is being passed on to all customers. So it could be the landlord who has that boiler that supplies heat and hot water to the entire building, or the individual tenant that may just have, or residents in an apartment that has their own boiler. Okay, I'm sorry.
Again, back to my question. The delivery rate is because the inevitability of them to deliver efficiently. Is that correct?
It is
So that's not the
basically,
consumer's problem.
it is for their pipeline,
Right.
but they have to say, they're saying that those pipelines are 100 years old, and they have to upgrade them, and they're just passing it on to the customer. Basically, that's what it comes down to. And if they don't meet their needs, to financial numbers, that's what they ask the government, the Public Service Commission for these increases, and they're just passing it on to everybody. So whether it be the landlord and or the tenant.
So they continue to make a good profit.
They're publicly traded, and since I've been in the industry, I've seen their stock go up significantly, including a couple of years ago, I believe it was $80-something. I believe it's now over $100 a share, so.
It's interesting to me that, I'm sorry, are you done?
Excuse me, I'm going to suggest that we allow the speakers to make their presentation, and at the end of the 5 minutes, the board members ask questions or make comments.
Tim made most of the presentation, I just wanted to add a couple of specific details to that as far as the delivery rates.
Okay.
And to expand, people say, well, that's the delivery side, how about the commodity side? That changes up and down, you see that every day in the market. 3 years ago, the market was even higher than it was today, but then it came off. So that's why the key portion is the delivery rate, is where many landlords and even tenants are seeing these increases, and they don't understand that my commodity rate is less than it was 3 years ago, but my overall bill is more money. And that's the answer. So I'll continue with the questions.
Are you, okay?
Yes, done, yes.
Any questions? Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so, do most of the apartments that are affected, are they landlords, providing for electricity, or is it the tenant providing for their electricity?
Great question. That is typically your multifamily apartment building provides the heat and hot water. The landlord will provide that heat and hot water to all the tenants. That's typically natural gas and or oil. Okay, the tenant typically will have a individual electric meter for their own unit, unless there is a master meter that does the entire building, and then that will be included in their rent, but the landlord will take care of that. I'm not exact, that's basically how we do the economics behind it. So there's 2 ways of doing that. Unless now, new construction has now electrified the buildings with the PTAC units. So those are the heat pumps and or air conditioners. So each unit has their own meter, and the tenant will be responsible for that most of the time. There are some buildings that do have installed that. That is redistributed through to each tenant, and they'll pay a portion of that to the landlord again. But then it's passing on those increases. That's the problem.
Ms. Roche, do you have a question?
There's no alternative to Con Ed for delivery.
There is nothing at all, you answered fine, the only thing you could possibly do is just be more efficient. So unfortunately, there are methods out there of doing it, but again, it's an expense, so that's the bottom line.
Anybody else?
You answered my question, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Next person on my list is Kenneth Nilsen. Mr. Nilsen, I understand you represent
Yes,
the organization?
yes,
You have 5 minutes.
thank you. I have some. Huh? Yeah, there should be at least 9 there. I got a few more. You want?
Yes, you may start.
I'll wait till you all have a chance, because I want to, don't start the clock until everybody has their.
Thank you.
Okay, so, I'm going to try to quickly talk to about five different items. One is the guideline increases have not kept up with inflation. The second has to do with insurance cost increases, which have been tremendous. The repairs and maintenance are declining. That's one of the things I want to bring out here, is that's not a good thing for the buildings. Interest costs are higher, as you know, and real estate taxes are way above inflation, way above what the guidelines board is assuming, and the effect of the depreciation. So the first one I'd like to talk about is the guideline increases. And for that, I'd like you to look through your documents to a chart that looks like this. So what this shows is 4 different lines. One of them is the CPI for all urban consumers. And you'll see in the boxes that where I got the data is from the government. And that's the top line that you can see. This is how the CPI has been going up cumulatively since 2010. The next line down is the cumulative 1-year guideline. And the third line, the bottom, is the cumulative 2-year guideline. So what you see is that there's a tremendous difference between the CPI and the 1- and 2-year guidelines. This board has set guidelines that are substantially below even the inflation rate, much less the cost of operating for landlords. And in the law, in the ETPA law, it specifically lists one of the things that to consider is the CPI, as well as the cost, the condition of the industry. And I'm sure the lawyers for the HCR can give you copies of what is in the law that you're supposed to be considering. And so what's happened is that since 2010 to 2024, the New York CPI has increased by 34%. The cumulative guideline increase for 1-year leases is 20.75%, which is 40% less than the CPI during that same period. And worse is the 2-year guideline is increased only 16% for 2-year leases, which is 52% less than CPI over this period. So this gap has been increasing dramatically since 2019. You can look at the chart. Graphically, it shows that. And it's time for the guideline board to step up to try to make up for the lower guidelines, because it's tremendously affecting our ability ability to provide reasonable housing in this area, in Westchester. For example, the guideline that was passed last year provides for a 2-year guideline of 3.5%. And some people complain that it was too high. Well, that effectively works out to a 1.75 per year increase, whereas the inflation rate, according to the CPI, went up 3.8%. So we're falling behind every year, and it's getting worse. That's just connected to the CPI. The second item I want to talk about is insurance. Our insurance, and other people will talk about this as well, because it's affecting everybody. The insurance for my properties has gone up from $203,000 in 2021 to $682,000 for the 25, for this year, for 25, for 26. Just think about what that means. That's like 3 times, and we're talking about big, big numbers. This will result in an increase of $1,368 per apartment per year, or about $114 per month if you divide it by the number of apartments that we have. Using the average rent, regulated apartments in my properties, which is about $1,494, I went through and calculated that whole thing, and it would require an increase of 7.6% just for insurance. The insurance companies say this increase is due to the high cost of repairs for the joisted masonry buildings that are most regulated buildings. It reflects the increased cost by things like the scaffold law. These costs and also the outrageous court settlements that have been allowed by law passed in Albany. So one of the things Albany says, we can't control the cost, we want to keep the cost down for the tenants, but then they pass laws that increase our costs tremendously and don't want to change them.
Mr. Nilsen?
Yes?
Your time is up, and I will give you the courtesy of 2 more minutes
Okay.
to wrap up, please.
All right.
Because I see you have a lot of material here.
Right. One of the other things is that if you look at the chart that the DHCR passed out, and you look at the cost of repair and maintenance over the last 3 years, it's basically flat or going down. This is in a time when the cost of everything having to do with repairs and maintenance is going up, which means there's less and less repair and maintenance being done on the buildings. And that's because our costs for everything else, taxes, insurance, have been going up, and it's just less money. The thing we can control is repair and maintenance, and landlords are doing less of that, and that's not good for the buildings. That's going to cause deterioration of the buildings in Westchester, and that's partly because of the HSTPA, which was passed in 2019, and it's also because of the guidelines that this board has passed for the last 10 years. The real estate taxes in Yonkers went up by 5.45% last year. Your guideline, I remind you, was 2.5%, so it's half of what that cost is, and that's our single largest cost. I'll skip depreciation, but depreciation is a real expense, and I can describe that, but I want to summarize. Basically, most of our costs are set by others, and we have little control of them. Taxes, fuel, electricity, water, insurance, and interest. The rent guidelines state that these costs, the rent laws state that these costs should be passed along to guidelines, or the maintenance costs and conditions will suffer. The lower guidelines in the past few years have not passed along these costs and are not sustainable. The reduction in repair and maintenance costs from 2022 to 2024 reflect that there are not enough funds are available for repairs after paying costs that we cannot control. The guideline, that buildings need a makeup guideline to increase this year, to bring the buildings to a condition that we all want them.
Thank you, Mr.
One last thing is that we've been dealing with such low inflation for like the last 15 or 20 years that people aren't used to it. I put also, the last couple of pages have to do with ETPA guidelines from 1974 to current. And you'll see there are periods where we had high inflation like we did in the last few years. And the guidelines, there are guidelines that have been 12%.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Finger, you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Nilsen, thank you. You started to mention that depreciation is a real expense. Why is that?
Some people believe or say in testimony to this board is that it's a fake number for tax purposes. The fact is that most of us are family operated buildings and we're long-term owners. So, for example, the depreciation on all of my buildings, for depreciating the buildings inside water is gone. So we don't have that. So what appears on the data that I give to the VACR is information that's the depreciation costs that are major capital improvements that, according to the IRS, have to be depreciated. So if I spend $100,000 on a new boiler, that doesn't appear like this year. It appears distributed over a period of 15 or 20 years, depending on what the IRS law allows. And the instructions from the ACR say we have to follow the rules of the IRS in preparing our data. So someone saying that depreciation is not a real number doesn't know what the rules are that are set by the DACR. Yes?
Yes, Ms. Hamer.
How many buildings do you own and where are they?
Yeah, we have eight buildings in Yonkers.
All in Yonkers?
All in Yonkers.
And of those, how many are ETPA apartments do you have?
The actual, some are, most are regulated, some are not.
So are you thinking of an increase, a number that you can share with us that you think would be fair?
I think that's something that probably you want to say. I think in the last guideline or in the presentation, but I think one of the things you should be thinking of is the law that was passed recently that talked about trying to regulate other deregulated apartments, where they were proposing a guideline of the inflation rate plus 5%. I would start there and go up.
Any other questions? Yes.
So I'm looking at your comparison chart,
Yes.
and if I'm reading this correctly, the cumulative 2-year guideline increased 16.35% as compared to the CPI. It's 34.2%, so that leaves a gap of 17.85% thereabouts.
It's actually, yeah, all right. Yeah.
Good, I'm glad my math is
Okay.
And we all know that, we realize that there is a need for an increase. However, is there any evidence of the tenant's ability to make up that gap through income, gain income, or like where would they make that up?
Right.
That's my question. Maybe perhaps it's not a question for you, but it's just something that I'm thinking about, certainly as a public member.
Yeah, well, I think that's a fair question, because I can give you examples where people who are rent guideline protected or protected in rent regulated apartments and have a very nice apartment and a very low rent because they've been there for a long time, but have 3 cars. These people are not suffering. On the other hand, there are people in our society who need help. And we, as a society, should be, all contributed to. You just can't put it all in the landlords. The landlords, we do it already. We have about 75% of the regulated buildings here have about 75% of them are regulated apartments. And that averages out to about $1,500 per apartment. The fair market rent set by HUD for a one-bedroom apartment in this area is about $2,000. So it's already, we're doing a bit on that. In addition to that, those of us who accept Section 8 tenants, I have other tenants who are tenant clients through Cluster, which is a group that supports mentally handicapped people. So we're doing it, but you can't lay the whole thing on the landlord. We just can't afford it anymore.
Anybody else?
Yes, Mr. Nilsen, thank you very much for your information. So let me get this straight. Your interest rate doubled on the leverage that you have on your buildings, which would mean that your mortgage payment pretty much did the same thing, correct?
Yes. Well, the mortgage payment, I also, they escrow for taxes. But
Just principal and interest or however it is,
Right.
that number was affected by
yeah,
almost 2 times?
right. I went at the interest rate
And
on 3 buildings that I had to refinance. Went up from 3.5% to about 6.8%. And that's real money. Just nothing changed except that number.
And your insurance tripled.
My insurance over the last, 3 years has tripled. It's just mind-boggling.
And I saw a statistic in here that says that basically a 7.5% increase would just take care of the insurance costs.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, if you don't mind me asking you, you brought up something that's, I think, very important to these hearings, and that is the work that's not getting done on these buildings because of this.
Right.
I would assume you have a reputation of being a good landlord. Let me ask you a question. I mean, I would assume that the work that has to get done, you're doing, but not adding the net operating income of these buildings.
Yeah, there's a certain, these old buildings, I'm an engineer by training, so I know what has to be done, and it's what I want to do. And so over the years, we've been reinvesting in the buildings to improve them. Every building that we've bought, we've improved it, and it's better. The idea is to bring it back to its former glory. Some of these buildings are 100 years old, but they basically have good bones. If you take care of them and invest properly, they'll last for a long time. You don't have to build new buildings. And I've seen the buildings that are going up now that are very new, and I'm saying they're not going to last 100 years. They're not building them the way they used to build them. And it's with everybody's interest to keep these buildings going, because it's much more expensive to build a new building, which is going to cost $500,000 or $600,000 per unit to build buildings. That's what it costs now.
Along with the fact that they're not going to be subject to stabilization.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Anybody?
Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Yes.
All of your buildings have mortgages on them?
No. Two of my buildings don't have mortgages. The others do, and I refinance them as necessary, but I don't take any money out. I'm just refinancing the existing mortgage. It's not like I'm using it as a vehicle to make money.
Oftentimes the issue of mortgages and interests come up as something that owners want this board to consider more so than we do. And yet there is a tremendous variation between owners and buildings and mortgages and terms, et cetera, that make it really difficult to make an across-the-board consideration of that factor, as opposed to things like electricity and maintenance expenses, which tend to cut across the board regardless of whether cetera, et cetera. So, even in your own situation, there's a variation in terms of what it's costing you to operate your buildings, because some do have mortgages and some do not.
Yes, and it's a reality. I couldn't have bought my first building without a mortgage. I didn't have that kind of money. And virtually nobody in this business has enough money to be able to buy a building without borrowing, without interest, without financing. That's just a reality. Our whole economy works on that. But the fact is, there'd be no market if you had no mortgages.
And you also seem to feel that, as you're stating it here, that there should be a makeup guideline increase to bring the buildings up to the condition that we want them to be in.
Right. Go back to the chart. Go back to the chart. And
what are your suggestions for tenants to make up increases in their incomes to pay for the makeup increases that you wish to see in the guidelines?
To some degree, I answered that already, but let me say it again.
I know that you said
some of the people
are doing okay,
you know,
but what about the people who are just getting by and who really
right.
don't have 3 cars and have been there for 40 years?
Yeah, and some of those people need help, and we as a society should do it. I know the state legislature just passed what they call a pilot program for, it's basically a Section 8 kind of program for New York State residents. It's like Section 8, which is funded by the federal government, and because they understand that there are working people, who just don't make enough to be able to afford it. And I think that would be, we as an organization, we're behind that proposal. I can't remember the exact name of it, so anyway, but that's one of the things that's possible. There's also, with people sometimes who get into financial difficulties, you know, there is DSS, and we work with them, and then there are other help agencies like Cluster or Catholic Charities and that kind of stuff that help people. But it's across the board. So there's no easy answer to that.
And why did you refinance for a larger interest rate?
Because I had borrowed under to a fixed rate for a period of time. I can't remember, it was like 7 years or 10 years, and that ran out. And then it starts floating, and it just kept floating higher and higher and higher, and then it floated above whatever the fixed rate is that I could get. So I'm hoping it's going to go down, because the loan that I got, I could reset it after a couple of years if the inflation goes down. But it hasn't, and I'm not sure it's going to go down again. I've been in this business long enough that I was used to a 6% rate anyway years ago, and then it went really low for about 15 or 20 years, and it's probably not, we're not going to see that in probably my lifetime here.
Anybody else?
I just have, I think we all can agree that those elements that are part of the CPI and reflect on the rate of inflation, it's not going to change. It's going to continue to go up. Inflation did drop slightly, and now with all that is happening, it looks like it's going to begin to rise exponentially very quickly. The problem we have is, how can we can't keep up or maintain some type of integrity with the gap that's there. How do you propose that we can reduce the gap, because we can't keep up with the rate of inflation?
Yeah,
am I right?
One of the things is,
at the same time,
yeah.
that same inflation rate is affecting the value of the dollar and funds that your tenants are getting.
Yeah.
right? Those that are on fixed income, like Social Security, they're not even getting an increase, right?
And I think there's no single answer to that, but it has to come from multiple places. One of the things is the government.
Absolutely.
I think there are things that, there are parts of the law in New York State that cause higher costs for us, for landlords, for everybody. One of them is something called the scaffold law, which increases the cost for landlords, especially the insurance, but it increases the cost for every contractor we hire, especially someone who's doing a roof. I skipped over that section where I talked about a roof that I did 20 years ago. It cost $10,000. It cost me this past year $57,000 for the same roof over 20 years. I can tell you our guidelines didn't go up that much in that period. And a lot of it has to do with the insurance costs that the contractors have to have. And it's tremendous. So we have something called scaffold law only in New York State. It increases the cost for everybody. The other thing has to do with the settlements. The insurance settlements are going out of sight, and that gets reflected in insurance. That's why insurance rates. Somebody else will talk about that who knows a lot more about insurance. But that's one thing. The government can do things. They're up there and Albany says, we got to do something about housing, a housing crisis, and what do? Part of it is them. We have met the enemy and they're here. But that's one. The other thing is reform the HSCPA. That was passed in 2019. That basically says, we don't want you to invest in the buildings. We changed the formulas to make it virtually impossible. I've got apartments that are sitting vacant because somebody who's lived there for 40 years. The rent is about $700. The maximum I could raise it and probably needs everything, excuse me. The maximum I can raise it is about $300. And it would cost me $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to do this, everything with, I could raise it to $1,000. I'm not gonna do that because the fair market rent is $2,000 for the apartment. It's a little, and to raise it up to $1,000, which is less than the cost of operating, I'm not gonna do that. You have to be a moron to do that. And and the legislature knows that, but they don't wanna, politically they're feeling they don't wanna give anything to the landlords, but at some point they have to do it.
How many apartments do you have vacant right now?
The regular turnover, I usually it's less than 5%, except for I have 5 of them that are just sitting, that have been sitting that are gonna sit for a long time until they change the law.
Thank you, Mr. Nilsen.
Okay. I'm happy to answer any questions to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Next person is Michael Persanis.
Thank you.
Persanis. Sorry.
One for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Persanis, I understand you represent the organization, correct?
I do. My name is Matthew Persanis. I'm a labor counsel to the Building Realty Institute, and in that role, I negotiate their collective bargaining agreement on behalf of over 600 buildings, rental buildings, and condos in Westchester County. Our collective bargaining agreement covers the vast majority of buildings in Westchester County. I'm here to talk to you about labor costs, both last year and this year. So in 2024, the BRI negotiated a new agreement with Local 32 BJ. That's the union that represents superintendents, porters, handymen, door people. It's really everybody who works in the building. When we reached that, it was one of the better negotiated contracts. I know there was some conversation a few minutes ago about how people can pay for increases. I can tell you about the labor side, because I check it monthly. The average labor increase, those who are in labor unions, has been around 4 to 4.5% per year wage increase. That doesn't include any health coverage, things like that. And oftentimes when we negotiate, the largest part of our increases are not actually the wages, but it actually goes into the pension fund or the health coverage. In our union that we deal with, 32BJ, the members do not pay for their health coverage. The employer pays, and that's required. So the wage increases on October 1 of 2024, the wage increase was $28 per week per employee. That represented a 3.09% increase for each union member. In October 1 of 2025, coming up in a few months, it'll be $26.40. That's 2.83% increase for every employee. In the same time, October 1 of 24, the health insurance went up to $1,870 per month per employee. That's a 2.97% increase. In October 1 of 23, it'll go up to $1,944, which is a 4% increase. The pension fund, October 1 of 24, it rose to $425 per month. That's a 6.25% increase. In October of this year, it'll go to $450, approximately 5.88%. There's also a legal service fund. In October, it increased to $16.63. That represented an 18% increase. There will be a freeze at the end of this year that will cover. The overall increases for 2024 were 3.79%. That's the entire package. For 2025, it will be 3.45%. And in 2026, for 3/4 of the year, it expires on October 1 of 2026. For 3/4 of the year, it will rise 3.33%. If you're going to ask me what do I think it'll be, then call me in about a year. I may have a better idea. It's too hard to predict. So as you can see, the increases, they're locked in. They're contractual increases. They do beat what is the standards out there, but there's still increases over 3% each year. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Persanis?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for these, for working toward these increases. However, what's the total for the 3 years, if I may ask?
For these 3 years, so it's a
Yeah.
4-year contract.
Okay.
If you look at the bottom, the overall increases were 3.79% in 24. It was roughly the same in 23. I didn't include it. I just did the year before, the year on, and the next year. 3.45 will be this year. And as I said, for 3/4 of the year next year, it'll be 3.33%.
So total cumulative would be?
About 11% for those 3 years.
And what is, so we just said that the cumulative, CPI, the difference between the CPI and the cumulative 2-year guideline was about 17.85%, right?
I believe so.
So, if we're talking about rent stabilized apartments, there's still quite a gap between the 11% and the 17.85%.
Very much.
Oh.
Mr. Finney?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand the numbers, Mr. Persanis. 3.9% in 24, 2.97 for health, and 6.25%. How do we come up with 3.9% when we look at those numbers?
Yeah, so each one, it's a matter of how much money. right? So it's overall cost. So when you look at it, the wages are by far the largest amount they pay. When you include wages, 4.3 weeks in a month. If you include wages, health coverage, pension, that's in descending order. So the pension is $425 a month. Wages are obviously quite a bit higher. The average wage right now for a building service employee is about $1,100 a week. So, you know, 425 is not even half of 1 week. So that's how the increase, the total increase gets shrunk when you look at it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
All right, thank you for your time.
Next person is Howie Ravikoff. Mr. Ravikoff, are you representing an individual or an organization?
I'm here as an owner of a ETPA regulated building. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Howie Ravikoff. Thank you for your service. You do not have an easy task ahead of you. Our industry is under attack. Without you, we cannot mount the defense. Without a significant increase in rents, we cannot keep up with the increases in our operating costs. My family owns a 29-unit apartment building in the village of Portchester. We care about our building. We care about our tenants, and we care about our community. We've been in Portchester for more than 60 years. This system is broken, but today it's all we've got. If you don't utilize the tools we have today, tomorrow we will have even less to work with. I'm going to highlight one category for you this evening to show you what I mean. You've heard already this evening about insurance. I'll speak a little more about it. In 2022, my insurance went up 31%. In 2023, my insurance went up 16%. In 2024, my insurance went up 27%. These insurance costs more than doubled in the past 3 years. I won't let on how much my insurance went up this year, calendar year 2025-26, because that shouldn't be a factor in the decisions you're about to make. But if you ask me later, I'll be happy to tell you. The increase in insurance costs for 2024 was $12,900 on my single building. You'd have to give me a guideline of 2.4% on a 1-year lease to cover that exact increase. What else went up in 2024? You have the information before you from the surveys. Every category with the exception of repairs and maintenance. Ken spoke earlier as to why he thinks that category went down. I agree wholeheartedly. We are putting less and less into our buildings because there is less and less money to do so. How long do you think we can keep this up? How long do you think we can go without a guideline that matches expenses? I haven't even begun to talk about inflation. The guideline you give, the guideline we need, has to equal, at the very least, the increases in our expenses plus inflation. How long before we start sidelining apartments? Mr. Nilsen referenced he's got, I think he said 5 already. He may be ahead of the curve. I know that's what I'm looking at. How long before essential services don't get repaired or don't get repaired in a timely fashion? How long before my entire building simply stops functioning? We've already reduced our maintenance crew. We no longer provide services like installing air conditioners or shampooing, cleaning, carpeting in the hallway. We used to clean this building twice a week. We know. Maintenance requests no longer get done within 24 hours. Hourly labor rates have gone up. We've cut out overtime. Our current situation is simply not sustainable. Our industry is under attack because our expenses are out of control. Please, please help us defend the real estate everyone in this room and on that board so desperately needs and wants to protect. We cannot do it on our own. We need a substantial grant guideline that's within your purview. And please don't give a discount to a 2-year lease. I don't get a discount just because I signed up for 2 years of any of my services. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Gregory.
Yes, what do you propose for 1 year or 2 years?
Sir, if I may, I'd like to offer you a format for you to determine that number on your own.
Okay.
I think you should be looking at our expenses. That's the first category. I think you should be looking at inflation. That's the second category. And I think you should be looking at how that wasn't provided in the past and assign an additional increase to that third category. I think if you follow that format every year, moving forward, we'll get ourselves out of this hole that we're in.
So how do we do that mathematically?
I believe you've got some information in front of you from our surveys that would help you with expenses. I believe you can get the number on inflation relatively easily. It's the CPI, Department of Labor Statistics, Northeast. You can pick which number you think is best for us. And if you look backwards, I suggest a 2% increase to try to make up for all the years where this board didn't give us a reasonable guideline based on the first two categories.
Anybody else?
Just, I'm sorry.
Mr. Ravikoff, and staying on the insurance theme, you intrigued me in regards to what 2025 numbers are. Would you mind sharing those?
I'll be happy to. My insurance costs this year over last year went up 52%, or $29,000, to a total of $76,000 and change.
And you're using 24 guidelines to pay 25 bills.
That's correct.
Thank you.
This process, by its nature, is behind.
Yes. So, just to follow up on Mr. Reverend Smith's question, you suggested that we use 3 numbers. So one of the numbers is, as I pointed out, the difference between the CPI and the 2-year cumulative guideline, which is 17.85%. And then on top of that, the increase in the, so the inflation rate, and then in addition to that, 2%, am I correct?
So I suggested you use costs for the first piece,
Okay.
CPI for the second piece, and looking backwards, I gave a suggestion of 2% to try to make up for years that have already gone by.
Okay, so then, I'm not sure what the first piece is, but the second piece we already identified as 17.65%, which is the difference between the cumulative, right, the 2-year, the cumulative 2-year guideline and the CPI, the difference is 17.85%.
My suggestion is slightly different.
Okay.
I'm suggesting you look at the CPI year over year. If you're looking at an cumulative CPI over an extended period of time, then perhaps that's a different way of going about finding a format for this board to operate.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any partners that are vacant at the moment? Because you were saying about Nilsen.
Correct, I don't currently have any vacant apartments.
The other question, what is your average rent for a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom?
I don't have that exact number, but I would guess it's in the neighborhood of $1,500
For a 1-bedroom?
for a 1-bedroom.
Any other questions? Yes, please go.
Do you have a mortgage on your building?
I do not have a mortgage on my building, but if I may elaborate to help you understand that reason.
Sure.
Thank you. My family owns a number of pieces of real estate. They're not all ETPA regulated housing. Lots of them are commercial buildings. The environment to incur debt or renew debt on a commercial building is much more favorable than a residential building. So we carry debt on the portfolio. This building is not a good instrument to carry debt.
Rocha. I have worked for the Rosa Builders for 23 years. Our industry is under attack. We need help and long-term support. Within the past few years, the cost of operating our building has gone up exponentially. For example, from 2023 to 2024, our water bill went up 14%. Our electric and gas bill went up 14% as well. Our fuel charges went up 50%. Our mortgage interest payments went up more than 50%. Interest rates have become extremely prohibitive, and banks show little interest to give out loans or mortgages to buildings with units under regulation. Our insurance premium went up 11%, and our liability coverage went down more than 85%, which means that we are paying more for less coverage. Obtaining coverage has become increasingly difficult and has come with conditions such as upgrading our electrical sub-panels. Additionally, many insurance companies are deciding to no longer do business in New York State, reducing drastically the pool of insurance companies to choose from. As you can see, the cost of operating our buildings did not increase by 2.5% or 3.5%. In addition to the alarming increases to the cost of operating our properties, we are faced with very restrictive regulations such as HSCPA and good cause eviction. HSCPA has discouraged us from making improvements. The higher cost of operating our buildings and HSCPA are pushing us toward the decision to keep units off the housing market. I understand that the Rent Guideline Board is not responsible for HSCPA, good cause eviction, and the higher cost landlords are incurring to operate their buildings. At the same time, it is important that the Rent Guideline Board considers those factors and the way those are negatively impacting our industry. The reality is that money is needed to pay utility bills, insurance premiums, taxes, make repairs and improvements. If the rents do not cover the expenses to operate a building, how can it be up to code? If buildings start deteriorating, municipalities will have to deem those inhabitable, which means there will be less units available to rent. In the long run, HSCPA, good cause eviction, and consistent low rent increase percentages will severely impact and deplete the housing market. Our industry is under attack. We need the Rent Guideline Board to help us. Please vote on rent increases percentages that will allow landlords to keep their building in good conditions and guarantee housing to tenants, not just for right now. I urge the Rent Guideline Board to think about the future, not just today. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Rocha? Yes, Ms. Stewart.
What guideline increases would you suggest?
I think it's a tricky question. I think that the rent guidelines that have been voted prior years are not sufficient to allow us to operate the buildings and make maintenance repairs or improvement to the apartments. If I would say 4.5 or 6%, I think it would be still low. I understand it's very difficult. I feel that you have said or expressed all do resident pick that up. I understand that, but how do we continue to operate the buildings with such low rates if the water bill goes up 14%, if the fuel doubled, if insurance premiums double, or even insurance companies, they tell us, we'll insure you, but you need to do electrical updates. It is not simple. have a rate to give you, but definitely not the previous rates or freezing the rates, like that's something done in the past. Landlords are also feeling the economy burden that is going on.
And the other question I had was how many buildings, how many units were located?
The Rosa builders own 3 buildings in White Plains, New York.
How many units?
400.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's the average range of your units on a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom?
1,500.
Yes. So say this.
Anybody else? Yes.
I'm sorry.
You said that you have one building and it's 400 units?
No, we have 3 buildings.
3 buildings and it's 400 units, okay. And, you said you have debt on the building.
Sorry?
You have mortgage expense, so there is
Yes.
debt on the building.
Yes.
Okay, is that debt resetting at any time? I mean, commercial mortgages usually set, as has already been stated, for a certain period of time, and then the interest rate can fluctuate. Is your debt set to reset?
Yeah, we might have to refinance.
You might have to refinance
Yes.
into a higher rate.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Next person on the list is Jason Schiciano.
Okay, I'm the insurance guy, so pretty much everything that's being talked about tonight is my industry's fault. It's funny, but not so much. Sorry? I can't, I'm sorry. Okay. Good evening, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Jason Schiciano. I'm co-president of Levitt First Insurance in Tarrytown, New York. We're licensed insurance brokers for 56 years now. We're Westchester's largest independent broker for the placement of real estate insurance. We represent many of the largest insurers, and our insurance advisors to the Building and Realty Institute and the Department of Advisory Council have asked me to speak about the insurance market and relative to these proceedings. If you look at the 2025 DHCR survey, Table 3, you may question a few of the numbers as misprints. For a particular expense, 15% increase from 2023 to 2024, on top of a 17.5% increase from 2022 to 2023. Reviewing last year's report, the same expense line shows an 8.5% increase for 2021 to 2022. So what kind of expense increases 41% in just 3 years, an average of 14% per year? And of course the answer is insurance. You listen to Mr. Nilsen and Mr. Ravikoff, obviously their insurance expenses far exceeded those increases. The March 2024 New York Housing Conference report entitled The Alarming Risk of Rising Insurance Costs for Affordable Housing outlines more severe trends. 2020's 26% annual increases, 104% increase per unit during the last 4 years, decreasing coverages and fewer insurance carriers competing for multifamily affordable housing business. The reason for the premium increases, reduced coverages, and lack of carrier options are well documented. They include climate change, inflation, carrier disinterest in ensuring affordable housing, New York jury's famous nuclear verdicts, and of course, this has been discussed earlier tonight, New York's unique in the nation scaffold law that applies 100% strict liability to property owners for certain types of contractor injuries. But none of those issues are within the purview of the Spring Guidelines Board. The introduction of the Housing Conference report surmises The insurance cost increases are so significant they are affecting the profitability and sustainability of affordable housing and depleting the cash flow that should be contributing to building reserves and repairs. The report's findings conclude these increases are severely eroding the cash flow of these developments, threatening the ability of owners to maintain their properties, pay debt service, and secure a reasonable rate of return on their investment. These are the same realities that Westchester's multifamily residential property owners face, and properly responding to these realities is solely within the purview of this Rent Guidelines Board. The feel-good solution is to provide rent guidelines that make tenants cheer for another year. Such a course would continue along a short-sighted path, one that leads to more vacant, affordable housing units during a time when they are needed more than ever, poor living conditions for tenants as units and buildings fail to be maintained, let alone be upgraded, and ultimately, sales of properties by owners whom have traditionally cared about the quality of the housing they've provided, many of whom have spoken tonight, to new, big corporate owners that pull every possible cost-saving lever to squeeze suitable return on investment for their shareholders to the detriment of their tenants. Rent guidelines increases have been in the low single digits over the past 2 decades. These persistently inadequate increases, coupled with oppressive new laws, have already had a very detrimental effect on tenants. Existing housing stock characterized by fewer available and lower quality units. If the board agrees this is an unfavorable trend, especially over the long term, I hope it will consider diverting to a path that provides sufficient rent increases to property owners so that they can once again reinvest in their properties and make better homes for a community very much in need and deserving of the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Are you proposing that this board will consider a double-digit increase for 1 year?
I'm an industry representative. I'm not a property owner, so I'm not going to take a stance specifically on a recommended increase. However, I do think that the formulas that others have suggested tonight, combining expense increases with inflation, along with some sort of catch-up for previous years, arguably inadequate increases, would be a proper path forward.
Anybody else?
Yes, I have a question. Oh, sorry, please. We're gonna start with Mr. Wood.
Thank you for your presentations, well done and very informative. I'm going to ask you about number 7, bullet point, the third bullet point down in regards to the ultimate sales of these properties. Are you seeing that happen already? I mean, in the marketplace, do you see, because of insurance and other increasing expenses, do you see some of your clients actually exiting there?
Well, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of apartment owners, and in a couple of cases, absolutely, yes, they've sold out to larger organizations. Now, that's consolidation. It's happening, in every industry, including mine, frankly. But I just, I think that it's general knowledge that along with this consolidation, and when family-owned businesses are selling out to larger corporations because they no longer feel that their assets are frankly worth the money that they have tied up in them, that the corporate ownership, the corporate entities that are purchasing them have a much more profit-oriented mindset because they have to return, adequate returns on investment to their stockholders.
And as their insurance expert, have you seen in the past when that's happened that the condition of buildings and the ownership has deteriorated?
Yeah, this is an interesting point relative to insurance because a number of property owners have spoken this evening about the pressure that they have, and the numbers bear this out. That there's not been as much money invested in maintenance and upkeep in the buildings. At the same time, that to some extent is affecting your insurance premiums, because if a roof hasn't been replaced on a building, for instance, in 20 years, many insurance companies won't insure that building. If a building still has certain types of fuses, or fuses at all, or certain types of circuit breakers that are not up to current standards, many insurance companies will not offer a quote on that building. So the remaining insurance companies that will quote buildings that are older, that don't have current, that don't have upgraded roofs and electrical and plumbing, etc., it really makes the number of insurance carriers that are viable for a quote down to a very, very small number, and the result is less competition and high premiums.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, the report you're referencing here says, it's titled "The Alarming Risk of Rising Insurance Costs for Affordable Housing." Is this specifically rent-stabilized housing, or are other types of affordable housing also seeing the same kinds of increases? Because this title says to me that it's not just rent-stabilized housing.
Correct. That's why I referenced both numbers from the DHCR reports and that report, but I would say without question, you can apply the general issues that are affecting the entire New York affordable housing stock in general that the report focuses on, are the exact same issues that Westchester County property owners are facing, without question. There's no different. The percentages of increase might be different, as you've seen in my notes, versus some of the property owners here who have experienced much higher increases than the numbers in either the report that you're speaking to or the DHCR numbers. But the issues behind those numbers are uniform across the board for all types of affordable housing.
Can you identify some of those other categories of housing, please?
You have Section 8 housing, you have tax credit housing, you have rent-stabilized housing. Those would be 3 categories.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks again for your report. It was very thorough. I just have a question about the last sentence in item number 6 that says, properly responding to these realities is solely within the purview of the Rent Guidelines Board. So I know that when Con Edison rates went up, there was a huge public outcry, and as a result, there was the public went to New York State, to the Assembly, and to the New York State Senate, and talked about perhaps sending legislation to prevent price gouging by Con Edison. Has there been a similar response for your industry, which demands, maybe some political action to prevent price gouging by the insurance industry?
First of all, I apologize for rereading that. I don't think it was properly worded. It implies perhaps something that's not the case. But what I meant is that your board has full control over how much rent is allowed to increase. That's all I meant by that. In response to your question, there's been a large amount of activity and focus on this at the state legislative level. The fact of the matter, if you look at what's happened by comparison in California, they had horrible wildfires, and if insurance companies were making such egregious profits, then in a free market economy, which for the most part we operate in, especially when it comes to insurance, you would see competition rushing into New York to get a piece of that pie, of those egregious profits. And exactly the opposite is happening. There are less insurance companies every year willing to write insurance for real estate, habitational real estate in New York State, because it is not a favorable class of business to write insurance. They can deploy their assets in other states and in other types of markets, commercial real estate, for instance, or construction or manufacturing, and have a more reliable rate of return on their investment. Just like in California, when those wildfires happened and the insurance companies raised rates in California and everybody was screaming, But the fact of the matter is, the insurance companies don't have to write insurance in California, and most don't. So the ones that are left are saying, hey, if you want us to write insurance in California, we gotta get a certain amount of premium, and it's the same thing that's going on here.
Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
I have a person who wants to speak here, it's not on my list. I can't understand the handwriting. It's for Housing Committee.
Oh, that's me.
Can you please give your full name?
Hi, Myriam Decime.
What's your last name? They need to have it in the record.
Decime.
Can you spell that, please?
D as in David, E-C-I-M-E.
Thank you. Are you representing yourself or an organization?
Well, we have a housing committee that I chair for NAACP, but I'm not officially here to say I'm going to represent them, so, but we're working with them, so.
So you have 3 minutes.
That's fine.
Thank you.
I'm listening to a lot of this, and of course, one is the testimonies are from one side, the landlords, and I don't see the renters and how we're getting that information. So that's one. The other thing that I'm hearing a lot of is that there's a lot of increase in costs, right? So for a while, we had low costs, or much lower costs. Inflation was much lower, right? We had 10, 20 years of low inflation. So the landlords were making, I would say, quite a bit of money then, right? We've only had high inflation for a certain amount of years. How are we taking that into account? Was there a lot of repairs done then versus what they're saying now? I think we need to consider some of these things. And then overall, insurance costs, utility costs, we often have to get that approved by the state, right? The state or federal just approves the increases. So if it's hurting everyone, in terms of that, we should not approve those astronomical increases, right? We should find ways to maybe make these industries more public so that we can provide these very needed services, not for profit, and goods not for profit, but at cost. So if we have public insurance, we have public medical, for housing, auto, all of that has gone up for the individual people as well as for these landlords. Why can't we look at having more public options so that we can afford it and also we can enrich the actual people who are utilizing this? So I heard labor costs going up and they're paying them a lot, but I think if we think about it, a lot of these folks who are getting that high labor costs don't live in those necessarily urban areas that this rent is going to go up in. They're not the ones who are getting the jobs. I think we need to look at some of these things and reconsider, not just let's raise the rent that the people have to pay. And as you've all said, they're not getting more money either. They haven't been getting increases for the last 30, 40 years, right? So I think we've got to look at the bigger picture. The other thing with housing, affordable housing, is we've been using this very flawed formula of enriching developers, giving them the money, the grants to improve buildings for luxury apartments in low-income areas, displacing the people. Gentrification is happening. The people who live there aren't the ones hired to even do the jobs, and the rents are increased, which increases the rent all around the community, and the people aren't the ones who are making that money. Why can't we do it where the state is building homes and we really have affordable housing versus build 200 units for 10% affordable and you've got 3,000 applicants for 20 apartments? And it's not even in the town that, it's open to all of Westchester versus like here in Rochelle. So hardly anybody in Rochelle are getting into these apartments. These are failed formulas. We can look at all of that and change that versus increase the rent on people who don't have the money to pay us. Those are some of my thoughts. Thank you.
You noted, I'm sorry, you had noted about the affordable housing, these new constructions and these tax abatements, and I totally understand that. But our purview is over ETPA buildings. It is not over the new constructions and the affordable housing.
Yeah, so I know that that would be the common response. This is not within our purview of this particular board, which I understand. But I'm speaking of, we're gonna look at this as a whole, that even though it's not in your purview, but we still operate within the state. The funding is coming from very similar sources. So even though it's not in your purview, we could still advocate and figure out how to make it happen for the right boards or get that information. So that's why I'm bringing it up here. Because it's a total system, it's not separate.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you speaking tonight, and especially in talking about the renters as well. So I know you're not here on behalf of the NAACP Housing Committee, but as being part of that, what have you personally heard that the renters are going through? Can you give us more examples? And if we have a double-digit increase, how would that impact the renters that you know of and that your committee tries to help?
Yeah, thank you. It's dire. You have a lot of young moms, young families, even older ones that are sleeping on other people's couches, that are trying to go through these lottery processes to get this affordable housing. And literally, you're on someone else's couch for like a year or 2 years, maybe even 3 years. They tell you the process takes 3 years to go through the list. And you have kids that are in school that need stability, but they don't have stability because sometimes you're in a place to say mom is here, the child could maybe go to another parent or a grandparent. It's been dire, and one of the things that we've found is a lot of people have had to move out. So the gentrification displacement, it would be good if we could do a study to find out where people are going. I know a lot of folks that I grew up with, I grew up here in Rochelle, have moved to the south because can't find the jobs and you can't afford, even if you have a job. Like, let's say you have a security job. That's paying about $40,000 a year. We talk about, $125,000 for law enforcement. They can't live here, so therefore we can't no longer have a residency requirement for law enforcement to be here in Rochelle. And one of the salaries is $125,000, right? But a security guard, $40,000. Lunch monitor, these are jobs that parents hold. But we expect them to be able to live here, right? Because those are Rochelle residency requirements. So it's very dire. We have them now. I know young ladies, when they heard me say, I sent this to them, they're like, oh, is this about affordable housing? I'm like, I need you guys to come out and talk about your experiences. And it isn't that they haven't come out, they've spoken to all the housing people that we have in Rochelle in particular, with no help. Everybody's like, oh, I'm looking for a place myself, and this is the process. The process is, it's debilitating, it's overwhelming, you're putting in piles of paper, and you think you're okay, you go through the process, you're trying to get into a housing, right? So you're trying to time it, right? If you're lucky to even have a lease. But if you're not, again, you're homeless essentially and looking for place. Sometimes you try to go to shelter to get some kind of aid. And you can't get the housing. And you work for the Rochelle school system, or you work for the city. Your kids go to school here, you grew up here, your parents, you've been paying taxes, all of this stuff, and yet you can't find a decent place to live. It's quite sad.
The other part of my question was, how would a double-digit increase impact these folks that you are talking about?
It's not doable. It's not, they can't make ends meet now. So That's not the source to look at. We need to, that's what I'm saying, we need to push back at whoever's approving these insurance, and it is price gouging, right? You have insurance now that, when you ask for your insurance, they're telling you you have a $25,000 deductible, right? You have a $25,000 deductible for natural disaster. You're like, if I have a $25,000 to do this, then why do I need insurance? So then they say, oh, well, you can look at FEMA, and FEMA is gonna provide you this relief. On all these disasters we have, we've had a lot of flooding in Rochelle, right? You go to FEMA, you're lucky if you get $200 from them. But we've allowed the insurance companies to put a $25,000 deductible if you have that policy. And if it's a new policy, you don't have a choice. I have an older policy, so I don't have it. But a new policy, you don't have a choice. Auto insurance, some of the same things. It's not doable. We gotta look other ways, and it's for boards like you, even if it's not in your purview, that is not an excuse to start talking to other boards of advocates and other representatives to make this happen for the right things. The money's there, and we can make this public. So if the insurance companies can no longer provide it, they're like, oh, we won't provide it, or we'll hold our apartment, good. Let's make it public insurance so that the people can really get the service they need at cost, and we're not doing it for profit. We can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Sultan. First of all, thank you for coming and giving your testimony. You're one of the few people who represent the tenants and the renters. I just want to make a comment about exactly.
Can I just say?
Sure.
Just because you don't see them here doesn't mean that they don't care, doesn't mean that they're not impacted, doesn't mean that it doesn't matter, right? But people are so boggled, and quite frankly, I didn't hear about it until last minute somebody told me about it, and I consider myself to be pretty informed. So however we're doing the communication, we need to figure that out, and maybe go to the communities, have a meeting where you invite folks who are applying for those 3,000 people who are on the waiting list for these different buildings from the lotteries. Let's invite them and talk to them and ask them, what are you going for, right? We can get that information. I wanted to say that because we always use that as a reason why it must be okay because the people are not here. No, they're under it. They're struggling. I'm sorry.
No, and that was exactly my point. I was going to say, thank you for representing. We have so few people. I know all the issues that have impacted the community. I'm very familiar. However, if you and others have the power and the influence in the community to invite them in, we want to have that balanced testimony from the tenants as well.
All right, let's figure out how we're gonna organize one where they really feel that they're gonna be heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'll have one more. So, it seems to me that you might be able to, address the statement that Mr. Nilsen made about, well, there are people who are struggling, and, there are ways that the government can help you. They can go to DSS, et cetera. Do you have any thoughts about that? I know I have my thoughts, but my thoughts aren't important, but maybe you have some thoughts or some experiences or anecdotes about what happens when people go to these different organizations trying to get some help because they are trying not to become homeless?
Yeah, well, first of all, it is, you do want to ask for help, right? But everybody always talks about pulling yourself up by the bootstrap, so you're working, you think you have a pretty decent job, right? You don't want to go and ask for help. You don't want to go and have to beg for help, right? You're working at least for 40 hours. You're usually working 2 jobs, right? You're usually trying to get whatever overtime you can at the expense of being home, taking care of your kids. You know how we talk about the kids don't have parental guidance and all that, because you can't afford on a salary to be home all the time because you gotta work. So the idea that you're gonna be a full-time worker and you still can't make your bills, your ends meet, and that you have to go and ask for help from the government is beyond meaning. Nothing is more depressing that you're working every day and you can't pay your bills. So it should not be the standard that we're gonna go to the government to ask for help and you are someone who's working every day. Because now people are taking this thing that you're just a freeloader, welfare queen, and the corporations are the biggest welfare queens, but we don't ever talk about them, right? It's the young mother with a child or two, and of course, usually the black young mother, because there's a whole lot more people on welfare, but that's not who we talk about. We usually talk about the young black mom, right? So it's very demeaning, and people are trying to do the right thing. I have one young mom now. She says, I make enough money to get this. They're telling me that I should have Section 8 in order to get into this apartment. I gotta try and go get it, but when I try and go get it, I make too much with the $45,000, $50,000 a year. You guys calculate how much that is, right? Remember, $15, most of the corporations say, we can't pay $15, we can't pay $16 an hour. That's not even a decent living wage. And then the government tells you, well, you're making too much to get that help. Where do you go? It's so unacceptable. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I have, luckily we have another person here from the tenants, Gaskin.
That's me.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I actually am a tenant at 33 Lincoln Avenue, which is Carrington Arms. The building was erected in 1972, and so it might fall within the parameters of the buildings that you guys help. Let me start off by saying thank you for what you do. A lot of what I feel is what Myriam has already stated. First of all, I found out about this through word of mouth. I was speaking to another community member and she said, oh, I'm going to a public hearing tonight at City Hall. I was like, really? Can you tell me about it? And she could, and then I did my famous Google search and found out that you guys would be here this evening. I am moved to speak because of the fact that we haven't heard tonight yet from too many tenants. And I really do appreciate the building that I live in, the community that I am a part of and that I hope to be able to serve. Care of these buildings and an ability to pay the rent is a lifeline for the community that I am part of. It seems like all around me, things are changing very quickly. And it all ripples federally, state, county, it comes into our front doors. The current AMI number for a family of 4 in Westchester County is very unreasonable and very much out of the way as compared to the salaries that the people I live with make. Normally, the families that are, part of the AMI in Westchester County make about half of the 125 or 120,000 that it's figured a family of 4 in Westchester County makes. And I've been told that that's due to the fact that in this calculation they included Pound Ridge and maybe Chappaqua, but places that are quite a bit more affluent with people that make much more money than the people that I live around and with, happily. It's a lifeline to have a rent that can be afforded, to have guidelines that are built in so that at the end of a year, an increased rent is still something that we have to struggle to make, but it at least is feasible. If our if a market value rent in New Rochelle is now approximately $2,000, and it's gonna go up another $300 or $400, I don't think that the people who are currently able to enjoy rent stabilized rents will be able to stay in the homes that they have now. And then what's gonna happen? We're gonna have a bunch of people without roofs over their heads. How is that going to fix anything? I understand somewhat more of what the property owners are going through, but the insurance industry is one of those systems. I mean, we carry car insurance, I carry renter's insurance, medical insurance, and every time something happens in one of those systems, it's a project for me to take care of. It's not an easy fix. I mean, I don't know what all the solutions are, but couldn't it be possible to advocate for the insurance companies to consider where they're raising their rates at this large amount? Could they consider the kind of renters that are in those buildings and perhaps not charge the property owner the same type of rent premiums that they would charge maybe property owners of luxury developments? I don't know. It is a lifeline. It's what allows working class people, seniors on fixed incomes, single parents and essential workers to remain housed with some sense of predictability. At Carrington Arms, we're not asking for luxury, we're asking to hold on to our homes. Many of us are already stretched thin by rising costs in every part of our lives. Transportation, healthcare, nutrition. Even with stabilization, rent increases have added up year after year. For tenants in a building like ours with long-standing residents, families raising children, and elders aging in place, even a so-called moderate rent hike can force people to uproot their lives. We want to remind the board, rent-stabilized tenants are not immune to hardship. Our wages haven't kept pace with inflation. Many of us are still recovering from the economic effects of the pandemic. If rent increases are too high, they will push people out, defeating the very purpose of stabilization. Carrington Arms stands as a critical place of affordable housing in New Rochelle. It's not just a building, it's a community, a diverse, vibrant, and stable one. And the decisions you make directly impact whether or not it stays that way. So I really feel that there has to be some innovative ways of thinking outside the box. Maybe there's something that you can do that can ripple across the country. Because what we're feeling here now is not a singular event. It's happening all over the country. And apparently, states and counties are going to be on their own to figure this out. We can't look to being bailed out by the federal government. So I guess I just want to say thank you for letting me state this, and you know, I am appreciative of your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
I just want to say I really appreciate your testimony on behalf of the tenants, because we haven't had a lot of tenants speak, especially this is the only one from the ETPA building that we've had speak, so I really appreciate that. You had said something about the renters insurance. Have you seen as significant increases in the renters insurance as they have on the landlord side?
Not much. I mean, you can get a basic policy for a couple of $100, but it's a lot if you are also, you know, paying for your child's field trip. You got 2 extra graduations to go to in June, and you know, their car. So everything counts for people who are in my tax bracket.
Yes. I want to echo my colleague's sentiments. Thank you so much for coming and presenting the tenant side of things. And to that point, we have another meeting. You can invite others to speak as well. We really want to, have a balanced view of things. And the only way to do that is to have representation from both the landlords and the tenants. All right.
Anybody else? Yes, Ms. Ann.
So again, echoing what everyone else has said so far, we really do appreciate you speaking tonight on behalf of the Carrington Arms and others who are in your similar situations. I appreciate it, and your honesty and your candor. It's really good to hear from people who are being directly impacted. And both you and Myriam showed that tonight, the other side of the coin. One of the other things I wanted to ask is that earlier we heard about those who belong to a union, 32 BJ, that they have gotten salary increases over the last several years. Have you received any type of increases or those in any of the income that you get? And do you know if anyone else who lives with you or around you in similar situations are part of unions, and have they received such big salary increases?
No.
Okay.
I've seen an increase in people wanting to know what's the schedule for the food pantry.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen an increase in people not going to the doctor because they don't want to or cannot afford the co-payment. I've seen an increase in lack of participation in community events that cost money because people can't afford to do so. I've seen an increase in people at places where you can buy things secondhand. I've even seen an increase in young people not calling Uber Eats and cooking at home. That's what I've seen.
So you've heard tonight many people talk about double-digit increases. How would that impact you, those who live around you, and the people who you feel that you're representing tonight?
To be quite honest with you, I am a single person, and at times it keeps me up at night because I would like to be able to age in place. And I'm on my own. So I try to keep positive. But I've just gotten to the point where I can watch a news program from beginning to end, where I can look at this thing that people constantly send me information on. It's very frightening now. And so I am really concerned about my mental health, and I don't think that I'm alone. It's scary out here.
And thank you so much, and your candor and your openness has been really helpful, and we appreciate it.
Okay.
I just have one more comment. You said that you would find out about this just today. Is there a way that you think it would be better to get the word out about this?
Well, I think the word, for me this was a 4:30, 5 o'clock information receipt, and so here I am. I think it would be a great idea. What I'll do is I'll go on the website and I'll connect with the person that I think the information came from, and I will send an email there, reference tonight who I am, and you guys will be able to get in touch with me, and I'll try to find other people who are willing to share their story for the next meeting. I can't guarantee it, because we're struggling, it's hard to get here. This is like feed the family time, do the homework time. Some people are working in at this time, they do second and third shifts, but I will try.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Elsa?
Yes, you have a question?
How are you? I wanted to make sure that you are aware that the third and final hearing is at Mount Vernon City Hall at 7 o'clock on Thursday. And everybody is welcome, regardless of where they live, because it's
Right.
all of Westchester County. You mentioned an increase of people on the food pantry line. And I know that there's a food pantry line, that I can see from my window on Saturday mornings. And that many of my neighbors are on that line. And, you know, I don't think anybody should be ashamed of asking for the help that they need. The owners, seem to feel, and I'm not negating the increase in their costs of maintaining and running their buildings. How many of your neighbors do you feel anecdotally that if we were to give the owners what they're asking for, bring things up to make up for whatever was in the past, make up for, you know, the less inflation, could you manage?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot that people do now that I'm aware of, besides me personally, to make ends meet. There would be even more to do, I don't know. You know, I mean, I don't go to church every Sunday, but I consider myself spiritual, so I'm like an optimistic person. So that's where I try to stay. But it's very difficult. There have been people who've had to move in with relatives, move out of the state, left the building and became homeless, died, you know, so there are lots of stories. Most of the people that I know of that live in my building or other buildings that are old in New Rochelle don't have a lot of options for other places they can go. You know, a lot of them. So I don't know. It's not a positive thing. You know, I don't like to stay here too long emotionally.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. You've been very brave today.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. And Thursday, I won't be able to attend that meeting, but I have some people that I know will
Send your friends.
spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you. Last person in my list is Genevieve Roche, and she represents the tenants. Genevieve, I understand you represent an organization?
Yes, I represent non-Vernon United Tenants.
You have 5 minutes.
Good evening, members of the board, and welcome to the new members of the board. My name is Genevieve Roche, and I'm a former tenant rep on this board and currently serve as the acting executive director of non-permanent United Tenants. Since 2010, I've inundated you with my analyses of DHCR data showing owners consistently high, healthy net operating profit year over year. And I have also provided data reflecting the demographic makeup of the 3 lower Westchester municipalities that contain 81% of the units this board regulates and from which owners extract their profits. Rest assured, I will be inundating you on Thursday with my calculations, but tonight I want to focus more personally on 2 things that have drastically affected my mindset in recent months. One, this spring I was invited to audit a CCNY class on housing futures, taught by 2 leaders in the field on why our housing housing situation came to be the way it is, how it doesn't have to be that way, and how it must change if we want to live in a decent and moral society. My second about face came when I was tasked to not only direct non-Vernon United tenants, but fill Dennis Hanratty's very large, empathetic shoes as the day-to-day case manager. Regarding the first, the housing class, eye-opening. I've learned much more about the financialization of housing that has occurred since the 70s, and also learned about the many options now being successfully employed to keep tenant housing affordable. And it doesn't involve institutional owners extracting a financial asset level of profit at tenants' expense. Briefly, the financialization of housing is a term that describes the increasing tendency for owners and investors to value housing as a financial asset, like stocks and bonds. The process increasingly divorces housing from its purpose as shelter, by using it to generate profits in financial markets which investors expect to continually rise in value. It makes it very hard to maintain affordability, and it increases housing instability because strategies designed to deliver a 20+% return are plainly incompatible with providing affordable and decent housing. When housing is used as a financial asset, returns are generated through reduced maintenance and aggressive eviction policies. Simply put, large returns like these are generated on the backs of tenants. The concept is antithetical to an affordable housing model. I've distributed a list of links in some articles generated by a Shelter Force study that provide context and a counterpoint to the story I understand an owner testified about last week regarding the failure of one over-leveraged institutional investor to meet its mortgage obligations. The epitome of how housing financialization works to the detriment of tenants. You need to keep foremost in your deliberations that we should be meeting people's housing needs, not letting housing meet capital's needs. Regarding my second revelation, managing NUT's caseload these last 5 months has quite honestly left me shaken and devastated in a way that all of the compelling, statistically based conclusions I can produce about profit levels and demographics simply cannot. The 2025 income cutoff for HUD housing assistance for a 2- and 4-person household are sufficient to afford rents respectively $1,020 and $1,275. But close to 1 in 4 households in Lower Westchester make less than $35,000 a year, for whom an affordable rent is less than $875. I ask you, where is someone who makes less than $35,000 or who makes $1 too much to qualify for HUD housing going to find a place to live for $875, $1,020, or $1,275 a month? In a word, they are not. Which is why the Neighborhood Preservation Coalition's statewide regional offices, including ours, counseled more than 45,000 tenants last year to prevent evictions. Since January, NVUT has counseled approximately 200 households at risk of imminent eviction, including a disabled man in his 50s who had suffered a stroke and is also legally blind, and whose increased disability income would be enough to cover his regulated rent. However, he has no way to pay the arrears for the period he was hospitalized. So he accepted his fate, sitting in our office crying, knowing that while he had a month's reprieve to find a place to live, he was going to end up in a shelter anyway, because there was no way he would be able to replicate the regulated rent he had been paying. Second, an elderly woman who came to us seeking help with her street application and whose annual fixed income equals slightly less than $12,000 a year. Her rent came to $1,000 a month. When I asked her how on earth she bought food, she said she received $25 a month in food assistance, and when that and food pantry staples ran out, she didn't eat. She also walked to our office with her paperwork because she could not afford to take the bus.
Ms. Ross, your time is up. I'm going to give you the courtesy of 2 more minutes.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it. And third, just last week, a single mother with 2 U.S. citizen children under 18 who is undocumented and does not possess a social security number, both of which have limited her eligibility for various assistance programs. She barely earns enough money as a cleaning woman to pay her $1,500 share of the rent, but it's the $7,500 in arrears after temporary job loss that will cost her family their income. Their home, will cost her family their home. These examples may seem extreme, but trust me, they are pretty much what we're dealing with every day as we scramble to assemble assistance packages from a network of charities, negotiate landlord payment plans, and draft orders to show cause to buy a little more time just to do the first two. Rents are impossibly high relative to income, and people are living just one unexpected medical expense or job loss away from eviction. It is the essence of housing insecurity, and it is just heartbreaking. So my plea to you is, please stop raising ECPA guidelines to support owners' financial instrument level, stock market level expectation of profit. This level of profit is incompatible with keeping rents affordable, nor is it what rent stabilization was enacted to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Ms. Stewart.
First of all, thank you very much for painting a very clear picture of the dire straits that many tenants find themselves in. I want you to talk a little bit more about the footnote that you have on page 2. And about the numbers in that footnote, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I have it. Well, unlike most of Westchester, the residents of Mount Vernon, Yonkers, and New Rochelle, which are where 81% of the rent stabilized apartments exist, they're not homeowners. 58% in Mount Vernon, 53% in Yonkers are renters, compared to 38% throughout the county. And the poverty rate runs as high as 14.7% in Yonkers, or 18.7% of blacks and 18.1% of Hispanics live below the poverty line. Seniors on fixed incomes are particularly beleaguered. 37.8% of Hispanic older adults in Yonkers live in poverty. 51.3% of Yonkers older adults have no retirement income, and 20% live in poverty. I will direct you to a study that's quoted in my full version of testimony. Compare these rates to the 9.4% poverty rate for older adults in the rest of Westchester. What I can say is, I've spent years crunching numbers. That's my background, my corporate forensic analysis background, and I spent 4 years being the director of finance and operations at Mount Vernon United Tenants. My, number crunching, remote working, happy place, and coming in January to be the active executive director and roll up my sleeves and do the casework has really, there are no words to describe how devastating it is to me. And then counter that with this amazing course that I took. There are so many possibilities outside of institutional investors reaping this kind of profit, for tenant shared ownership, for HFTC, there are just so many possibilities I learned about. So I guess I want to urge the board to understand this is not what we have to do. And the tenant and the other person who spoke, they have it exactly right. It's a privilege to be able to afford a rent-stabilized apartment. Now I understand from the survey numbers, the rents are $17.71 and $19 something for 1 and 2 year renewals. Well, that's nowhere near. If you look at my handouts, that is nowhere near what people making less than $35,000 a year could afford, or people who just meet the HUD cutoff to get assistance to live in a HUD building. They couldn't possibly afford a rent-stabilized apartment. So the point is, while you may not impact that, it would just be wrong to raise rent-stabilized rents, because these people, the two people testified from their neighborhoods and their experience, and my experience speaking to people every day, 200 tenants we've counseled since just January. rents go up, they don't have a place to live. And it's as simple as that.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Gay.
Hi, thank you for your very, very thorough report. I just took some notes. You know, the financialization of the housing market. It's a double-edged sword because I think that's fueled by the concept of real estate investment as a way of building generational wealth. So my question to you is kind of like on the flip side of what I've been asking landlords, right? And we've been asking them, what do you think is a reasonable 1 and 2 year rent increase for rent guideline? So what in your estimation, based on what I just said, is a reasonable profit for a real estate investor?
Well, seeing that consistently over the 15 years I've been testifying, both on the board and off the board, the landlords have consistently reaped a net operating income of in the 30 to 35% range and even higher. That's not what the ETPA was intended to do. This is rent-regulated housing. And I gotta tell you, and I'll talk more about it on Thursday when I crunch the landlord numbers, etc. But they like to get up here and talk about their expenses going up. Now, one person, not a single landlord person, got up and said they made no profit, or that the landlord survey numbers are wrong. So I think you have to think about this, because this concept, and I strongly urge you to read the one article I've attached about the financialization of housing. I mean, it was so eye-opening. This is not stocks and bonds. These are people's lives. Housing is shelter for people. It's not for profit, and not at that level. The ETPA law says that they can meet expenses, that the rent guidelines are used to meet expenses and make a reasonable profit. But a financial instrument, a stock market level profit is not, absolutely not, what was contemplated. And I don't know if you're talking about, I don't think you're talking about the legacy of ownership for institutional owners, but I mean, I'm not sure what you're